Welcome, everybody, to episode 22 of EV Society's Canada Talks Electric Cars webinar. My name is Tim Burrows. We look forward to bringing you EV-related topics each month, often from a Canadian perspective. If you could design the ideal charging station or hub, what would that look like? Thanks to Electric Autonomy Canada and our two special guests, some very talented designers were given this opportunity. And the results were simply stunning. Before introducing today's guests, let's review a few housekeeping issues. We encourage you, of course, to ask our guest speakers questions at any time using the webinar's Q&A feature. Remember to click on the thumbs up button next to any posted question that you'd also like to hear answered. And this will help us at the end get to the questions that are most popular before we run out of time. Today, EV Society member Jason Arnaud is back with us and will take us through your questions immediately following the presentation. As is our practice, the webinar will conclude no later than 8:30 Eastern Standard Time. So finally, we get to the good stuff. Today, we are fortunate indeed to have two great guests joining us from Electric Autonomy Canada, Nino Di Cara and Ilana Weitzman. Elena is VP of Strategic Development, Clean Transportation for Electric Autonomy. As part of her role, she develops innovative programming and initiatives in partnership with government and industry that accelerate the transition to cleaner, safer, and more affordable transportation. Nino Di Cara is founder and president of Electric Autonomy Canada. He's a passionate believer in electrification and the benefits that technology will bring to our future mobility. 10 years of leadership, he doesn't look this old, by the way, folks, but 10 years of leadership roles with corporate marketing agencies and 7 years executive board director for B2B industry. Nino was recipient of the EV Society's 2020 Howard Hutt Award for excellence in the advancement of electric transportation. So welcome, Elena. And I think Nino is going to stay in the background until we get to the questions and answer session. And Elena is going to sort of guide us through the presentation. So with that, hi, Elena, are you with us?
I am, and I'm really happy to be here. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I'm really excited to share the competition if you haven't seen what we revealed just a few short weeks ago to the world. And so we launched a competition with the idea of what would the electric fueling station of the future look like? And there are a couple of ways to go about this, but our approach was really to harness the power of a global think tank, to really put this question out to the world and see what came back. And, you know, why would electric autonomy do this? One of the key parts of our mission is to help people adopt the technology in a confident way and to help business leaders and policymakers make wise decisions around the new technology. And we see that in the EV charging space, there's a lot of sort of what I would call retrofitting, or where we're adapting the existing infrastructure, or charging is kind of popping up in this willy-nilly way in the back of parking lots and grocery stores. There isn't a lot of intentionality behind how our future is being shaped. We've all lived with the legacy of gas stations for so long that we now need to kind of think about this afresh and what could the future like when there is no gas. Part of it was also to address range anxiety. So there's this, as you all know, a lot of the discussion out there is a question of range, as though after driving for 3 or 4 hours, you wouldn't have to stop anyway. I know I always have to use the washroom, so try to eliminate that fear of the charging stop. I think also, if we wanted to create envy among gas drivers, we wanted that moment when people would drive by one of these stations and go, wow, I wonder what that is. I wonder what it would be like to stop there. And hey, mom and dad, why aren't we in an EV? So trying to kind of put that gesture out there. And of course, like, make something amazing happen for Canada. So it was a global competition, but it was very clear that what we were asking people to do was to design something for Canada. We want to acknowledge our sponsors. We had fantastic sponsors supporting us: Parkland, Denton's, which is a law firm, Cadillac, CIBC, and of course the support of the Electric Vehicle Society and EVEC in Quebec. So what did we do? We put out a brief to ask designers what it would look like not only to recharge the vehicles, but also to recharge the humans at this rest stop. It was designed specifically for highway side rather than inner city. As we know, many people home charge in their city locations. We put a huge prize purse for us, especially as a startup, $40,000 in prize money. We generated a global PR campaign with the idea of capturing the imagination of architects around the world. And we really were pleased to see entries come in from all over the world, from Kazakhstan, Singapore, Denmark, Italy, Portugal, Canada, the US, the UK. The list goes on and on. And the criteria we asked the judges to sort of score on were the innovation of the concept. We really wanted something that rethought the experience from the ground up for electric vehicles. The design, we wanted something super cool that was going to be a beacon of the future and differentiate just on its look and feel. Sustainability, of course, that is why we are doing this. And feasibility, we wanted something that could be built in the near term, not something super futuristic that was going to be years and years away. We were really lucky to have an incredible jury making these decisions with us. You'll see Wilf from the Electric Vehicle Society, of course, and Simon Pierroux from EVEC. So really ensuring that the EV driver community was involved. Chelsea Sexton as well, and Nino, of course. And then we had industry coming in with Ian White from Parkland, which is actually major oil and gas supplier and retailer, but they are very agile and are looking at what this disruption looks like. And we're very excited to be working with them on that. And a host of really fantastic architects: Claire Weiss. Many of you may have heard of Bruce Kuwabara. He's sort of the elder statesman of Canadian architecture. Peter Vicker from a company called Local Projects in New York that really works on experience design, and they were the ones behind the 9/11 Memorial in New York. And Magali Debelis, who's a car designer, an EV car designer, which I think is really cool. So a lot of different points of view. We had a very spicy jury call to decide the winners, who I'm going to present shortly. So our first prize went to an architect based in Scotland. He's worked all over the world. He's worked in the Middle East, China, and I think you sort of see that in what he brought to the table, this kind of very global sensibility. It really breaks with what you would imagine that concrete gas station of the past to be like. It's this beautiful lozenge structure with solar on the roof, the solar helping to power the facilities, of course, not the chargers. But you'll see that it's a timber structure. So this idea of sustainability in the actual building and the building envelope itself. These beautiful overhangs of that canopy, so the cars are sheltered, which I know is really a complaint with current infrastructure. Often there's no shelter from the elements. So this is quite beautiful. And our one of our jury members, Bruce Kobara, put it really well. He sort of said, the big change is that with an EV charging hub, everything can be under one roof. There's nothing toxic, there's nothing hazardous. So you don't really have to separate the vehicles from the building itself. And it creates this seamless experience. The building itself is punctuated with courtyards so that you can relax and you can lounge. You could even imagine novel amenities like fitness or a farmer's market, or of course, a games room. And I think that's fun, is there's a lot of adaptability in the design to accommodate different zones. This gives you a sense of the plan. So, it could have a cafe, it could have shopping, and the charging spots sort of hug the perimeter. And then it can size up and down depending on the location. So you could imagine a rural location with a sort of very small footprint, and then it gets elongated for major commuter hubs. At night, you get this sort of beautiful lighting. The LED strips really accentuate the skeleton of that roof structure. And then nice touches like wayfinding to point you to an open charging bay, so that you're not, needlessly circling the building. And it also is, minimizing vehicle traffic and ensuring that there's the zones as safe as it possibly can be. Our second prize was a concept called The Circle from Fabrika Architects in Istanbul. This one's really beautiful. It's essentially a big timber canopy in the shape of a circle that forms an inner oasis that protects you from sort of the highway. You almost end up pulling right up and then walking straight into this plaza. It's quite a simple form, but the impression is quite dramatic. And I love that, these pavilions are sort of sited right underneath this canopy. So you can have retail, you can have washrooms, cafes, and then in that inner circle, you have these playgrounds. You can imagine it in winter. And this real sense of connecting people. I think, there was this sense of community and our need for connection, especially in COVID times, and how that can happen in these public plazas. And then at night, again, just this sort of beautiful, welcoming structure. Our third prize was by a Ukrainian architect, Pavel Babienko, who's based in Berlin. And it's called Plug and Play, which I think is a nice name for what on the outside looks like a really traditional gas station, even with that sign at the top. But then he disrupts it, and he's built the whole thing on these 6 meter by 6 meter squares, in a sense, and then just sort of punched them with these courtyard spaces. So again, like the other two designs, there's a real integration of the indoor and outdoor space, and a really nice flow to the spaces. You can also see how lovely the thought and the touches that went into these. So you see the open charging bay with the white lighting, and then the charging is red, and then those will turn green once the charge has been filled. So you can just sort of glance over and see the state of charge of those different vehicles. And you can imagine the difference between walking out of your car and traversing right into this integrated hub, instead of that experience of having to cross a vast parking lot from a fuel pump over to a washroom or a cafe. It's just a completely different thought process and design. Spaces like playgrounds, why not? I think that would be fantastic. A beautiful cafe, and even, a library. It was great to see how creative you can get with amenities when the dwell time goes from that 3 to 5 minute pump to 20 to 40 minutes, depending on charge speed, of course, and the speed of the charging in the vehicle itself. I also want to thank the EV Society for the contribution. Part of the competition was surveying drivers about their habits, and that happened simultaneous to the program brief being out to the architects. And, I think what was great to see was that for EV drivers, the table stakes are the same. We need the same conveniences. That's just, that should be a given, that there are clean washrooms, there are food and coffee options, and that it's a sheltered space with well-lit areas to charge. But then, there's the opportunity to enhance this roadside experience. Retail and grocery shops where you can do errands, lounge areas, indoors and outdoors where you can, catch up on email, as well as outside areas for walking your dog or just taking a stroll or stretching and relaxing. And I think it was really neat to see that a lot of the designs responded to this and really brought those ideas in. But again, those were our top 3 winners. It was unbelievable, the effort and the beauty of the entries that came in. And I just want to show a handful of other ideas. This one again was from Istanbul. It was a concept called Econe, and it's really neat. All of these green roofs sort of point slightly downwards and create a different look at point. So you can sort of walk up to the top of the station and find a different lookout. And there's also an accessible inner courtyard and garden. Symbiotic Ring sort of reimagines an EV charging station as sort of a plaza. Cycle Circle was very neat. This was a double ring structure where the inner ring is where you charge your vehicle, and then the outer ring is just over 1 kilometer. So the exact time it would take you to do the outer ring is about the amount of time it would take to charge the inner ring. And it sort of looks like this big habit trail that crosses the highway. And I could imagine after a toddler's been kept cooped up in a car, you just let them loose and have them run around the ring. And it was particularly cool because the roof has PV film on it for solar, and then the floor is piezoelectric, so actually captures the human power at the same time. This one's Shelter, and that hill you see beside it is made for sledding in the winter or picnicking in the summer. This one's just really spectacular. It's this kind of ring that moves from the bottom to the top and offers a beautiful lookout in a wilderness zone. And I also wanted to talk about some of the things that we learned from the architects. So we realized that the architects were really responding to this idea of what does being Canadian mean? And a lot of that had to do with landscape. So they really were thinking about how to bring the outside in. And it definitely picks up, I think, on something that we've all experienced during COVID, which is this reconnection to the outdoors and the importance of that for our well-being. The design of these entries are sustainable, meaning a lot of them are modular, a lot of them are prefabricated. They use materials like timber in an effort and integrate solar, all in an effort to reduce both the energy we use and the embodied energy of the site itself. And I think that's going to be very important going forward, that the charging experience leans into why we are all adopting this technology. Another thing we realized was that there can be really interesting parking configurations, especially that allow for pull-through charging instead of back-in charging. So that's something that we've definitely been discussing with some of our sponsors. Here you can see that they've taken into account some of the larger vehicle types that are coming into supply in the coming years, the SUVs and the pickups that we are all waiting for. Definitely also the global community picked up on Canada's Indigenous identity. And so some of the designs were quite explicitly inspired by Indigenous design. And some were, I would say, almost subconsciously, a lot of the curvilinear structures that we see are very much, if you see a lot of the new Indigenous cultural centers or the work of Indigenous architect Douglas Cardinal, you'll see those curvilinear and circular designs. And I think that's because this idea of community that a lot of the architects are trying to drive as part of the change, and that idea of how do you connect people, and circular structures naturally connect people. And so that was lovely to see. Also the idea of how vehicles interact with humans. So a lot of them tried to solve that problem of minimizing the interaction between pedestrians and vehicles. We also saw wellness facilities cropping up. This one has a rooftop running track or dog walking, but a lot of that across the entries, whether that was outdoor playgrounds for kids, trail systems around the stations, or dog parks and green roofs. It was really phenomenal to see that. We also realized that the stations can have a smaller footprint, and I think that's a key change. You know, you can even site the charging right under the station itself, so you're using the building as that shelter and that canopy. And again, this idea of canopies or roof overhangs. I love the idea of, you know, in a snowstorm, you come back out to your car and it is not covered in a foot of snow anymore after you've stopped for half an hour. So I think, you know, these are all things that are not just as good as gas stations, but better than. We're really thinking about the human as well as the vehicle with these designs. So what happened? We announced the winners, and it was amazing to see the public and the media embrace this idea. We had, I think we're up to over 100 million media impressions. I think we're maybe nearing 130 million media impressions with coverage by Global News and the Globe here, but also globally, Fast Company, Green Car Reports, Tree Hugger, and some of the design press. So that was tremendous to see, because what we are trying to do is show people that the future is going to be much nicer if we can create change. And we also wanted to ensure that all of the money that's being poured into this infrastructure, so you think about what's happening in the US with Biden's plan to spend $1 billion every year. And this is a pivot point. Either we're going to build fantastic infrastructure, or we're going to continue to have this sort of willy-nilly approach to popping chargers in the back of parking lots. And I think trying to show industry and the world that there's an opportunity here, and there's an opportunity to transform the gas station experience. I kind of liken it to what happened to airports when our security wait times went up, where airports used to be kind of these dingy, not very enjoyable spaces. And then the moment you had to spend 30 or 40 minutes at the gate, we got great restaurants, we got fun retail shops. And I think that kind of transformation can happen to these stations and these roadside stops. So the great thing that happened was that we sort of woke up on the day of the announcement, and our primary sponsor, Parkland, let us know that they were going to build the station based on James Sylvester's design in British Columbia, which was a complete shock. It was intended as a design, an ideas competition, which means we really were just trying to use it as a think tank. What are all the best ideas that we can draw on from everyone's experience around the globe? And it was phenomenal that Parkland just jumped in and decided that that you know, in a way, this was something that was really viable. They could see how it was a true adaptation to the needs of a new customer, and really lean into that. And we're excited to see that come to life, hopefully within a couple of years. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Elena. That's terrific. Nice, beautiful overview and some great ideas there. Absolutely amazing. And it'll be amazing to see some of these things in a brick and mortar form I'm going to call on Jason now. Jason, would you mind taking a look at the questions and giving them a go?
No problem at all. Thank you, Tim. So we have a few questions to run through. The top one is, will the charging space be open to any charger vendor? And who will own the chargers?
That's a great question. So Parkland would, will be looking both at the retail and the charging infrastructure. So they'll be powering it up, so to speak. I'm not sure how much we can say, but I know that a major non-legacy auto manufacturer has approached them to install their chargers there as well. So we are encouraging a kind of approach where there are chargers of different types available at the station to accommodate different vehicles.
Ilana, could I get you to end your screen share now so we can see all these good-looking people at once on the screen? That's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that one. Next one is, these are all great designs, but how do we build these out to less populated routes?
Yeah, I think that is a great question. And we would love to see, again, as I said, a lot of these are modular. That's one thing that I really loved. So you can imagine them expanding or contracting. And James Sylvester's lozenge at its most basic is essentially, a canopy sited on, on these this prefab timber structure. So it can shrink down to quite a small footprint. We would love, as infrastructure investment comes from government, or industry, for that to be the idea of, putting something beautiful on all of our highway corridors, I think is really important. And that's one of the reasons why we did this as a public competition. So I think, you put something out there, you try and get it in the public eye, and you hope that as many people as possible see it. And we've also been presenting it to government and trying to ensure that there's visibility about the possibilities of what our infrastructure can look like, as you say, not just sort of on our big routes, but also in rural locations.
Great, thank you. The next one's a bit of a technical question, I guess. Are high voltage induction chargers a possibility?
Maybe Ilana, I'll dive in and answer that one. Yeah, for sure. And it would be great as and when the technology is ready for those to go mainstream, and as and when manufacturers start installing them on their vehicles. These designs lend themselves really well to a vehicle just driving up and wirelessly charging. But obviously, it doesn't seem like that's imminent in the current window of time.
Okay.
For mainstream vehicles, for consumer vehicles.
The next one is, did costs enter into the decision-making process?
Yeah, so I think feasibility did. And, I think people sometimes look at buildings like this and they think, oh, it's really pretty, it must be really expensive. But again, more with less is designed as a timber prefab structure. It is actually designed without a foundation, so it sits on micro piles. And so it's very light. It's a very light touch on the site. It even has been designed so that there's a floor cassette where the conduit can run through. So if you need to increase the size of that conduit, instead of retrenching, you pop out your floor cassette and you pop in a new conduit. So, EV charging stations, because of the power, are expensive to build, but the building themselves when you look at these structures, they're actually thought through for cost efficiency. I will also say, and I'm sure everyone here knows this, is that there's also a cost in externalities. So if you pour a bunch of steel and concrete into a structure, there's the added environmental cost of those materials and the embodied energy inherent in that. So I would always vie to look at the whole cost equation, not just the financial cost.
Great. Next one is, oh, and the questions are coming in now. Have any of the big oil companies like Esso, Petrocan, Shell looked at these concepts that you know of? I can see them looking at these great designs for future planning purposes.
Maybe I can dive in on that one, Ilana. And so our sponsor, Parkland, that Ilana's referenced, actually operates and fuels gas stations across the country under brands that you know well, Esso, Chevron, Ultramar, Pioneer, On the Run. So you will see these chargers, these designs actually popping up in Canada, potentially under some of these brands. I don't think they've given full consideration to the way that it would be branded yet, but Parkland is the company behind a lot of those big international brands that you see. And as you saw from the media coverage that Ilana presented, the interest has been global in this. And I think, as you know, in the EV community, we love sharing good ideas. So certainly from the feedback that we're getting directly, we are seeing that this has been picked up quite broadly among the community. So I expect they're looking at it elsewhere, outside of Canada.
Okay, thanks, Nino. Next one is, cities are key to plan and regulate the future deployment of electric charging stations in our communities. How could we better equip municipal urban planners with examples of design and regulations related to public electric fueling stations that could be integrated into city plans and related bylaws?
I'll start on that one, then maybe Nino will baton toss. Yeah, as I said, the competition was, we kind of had to come up with a bit of a concise brief to rally architects around a specific idea. And this one was highway charging. We'd love to do one for cities. I think it's, you know, as that that person has pointed out, that's another need. And I think, you know, how do our urban environments adapt is a big question. So, you know, down the road, we may run a competition around that. I think that there's going to be different opportunities in cities. And, you know, hopefully if this can inspire anything, it's, you know, I'm sure all of us remember those sort of drive-ins of the past. Like, how cool would it be to have a really funky drive-in in a city center where EVs can charge? So that's my answer from the architectural standpoint. And now I'll let Nino think about it from a policy standpoint.
Yeah, I love the question, because we've got 3,500 municipalities across Canada approximately, and obviously they have a big impact on planning decisions and influence in the build of these kind of things. You know, hopefully we're already doing it with our outreach and with our own work and with our own PR campaign, seeding these ideas and these visions with people. But I think one thing that the EV Society does incredibly well, and its members across the country, is actually advocate on a local level, speaking to your own councillors and municipal officials, and just sharing the ideas with them directly. Obviously, there are other things that we're doing, like, you know, getting involved in presenting at conferences and things like that. But I think really it's actually the grassroots level where that influence starts really taking shape.
Next one is a comment from Glenn. These are great. Will you be looking into the BEV truck stop?
Yes, again, we had that conversation with Parkland at the beginning when we were coming up with the concept. Is we said, like, are we handling commercial commercial traffic, including trucks? I think that would be an evolution of this program. It's a different need, and we started with the consumer, particularly since heavy duty trucking adoption is maybe a little further away, and so we thought, okay, let's tackle consumers where the adoption curve is really happening. But definitely, Nino and I are thinking very much about the needs of fleets and the freight and trucking industry, because when we think about GHG emissions, there's unfortunately an increase and an acceleration in freight and trucking that has to be tackled, and opportunity charging for long haul is going to be absolutely critical to this transition. So I think it's a great point.
Makes sense, thank you. Next one, you've answered this already, but I'd like to see if you want to expand on it. The question is, how long would it realistically be before one of these gets made? You said that there's interest, but maybe beyond the first one, how long do you see them really before they really start rolling in?
Well, I'll dive in. Yeah, so Parkland has committed to build the first one in BC, and they've given a timeline of a couple of years to do that. So, just to highlight, the winners were just announced a month ago, and so conversations with the architect and site selection and so on. There's quite a long path to building anything of this kind of scale. But what I can say is that they're really leaning into this, and so I fully expect that build to happen within a couple of years. And who knows after that? I think a lot's going to hinge on how well the first one is received, and also how well the modularity of it can actually be adapted to different sites and different configurations across the country. But I don't know, it's one to ponder on. We spend so much time thinking about how quickly is the EV adoption rate going to take shape, and for sure we just need a lot more of these kind of EV only charging stations being purpose built, whether it's these designs or something else. We just need a lot more of this dedicated public EV charging locations.
Okay, the next one's actually something I didn't realize. Ontario already has a system of rest stops called En route on all the 400 series highways. These would have to be substantially redesigned to incorporate these designs, and Ontario allows no other direct access from the 400 series highways other than En route, which is something I didn't know. So then would these new centers have to be installed as a completely separate system?
So I'll speak a little bit to that. So yes, as anyone familiar with Ontario knows, the en route stations get exclusivity in those zones. It's a long-term lease, I believe, to operate those with a private company. And so no, these will not replace en route stations. I know the IV charging network is going in, but it won't be anywhere near this experience. I think that is obviously a major highway corridor, but there are so many other corridors that are that are great opportunities for these kinds of stations, whether that's you're traveling between Montreal and Tremblant, or you're traveling from Vancouver down to the Okanagan or up to Whistler, or you're heading out to Canmore. I mean, there's all kinds of other highways where you can absolutely see the need for these kinds of stations. And maybe there will be an evolution in the thinking around that exclusivity structure in the future, but we'll see.
Well, and I think the other thing I'd add is I think drivers will go wherever the better experience is. So if you have to pull off the highway and drive for a quarter of a kilometre or something to go to one of these things, once you know where it is and the experience you're going to get, I think I think people will do it, because there's a different experience that EV drivers need, and I think increasingly will expect.
Like the EV charging at the Big Apple.
Yeah, isn't that great?
That's a premium charging experience. Okay, I like this one from Keith. He asks, how do these designs fit with the 15-minute fast charge times many cars will experience in the coming years? It's an awkward amount of time, too short to do something substantial, but too long for many to just sit.
So we'll give you another little scoop, which you may have heard about, which is that Parkland has bought M&M Meat Shop. So you could imagine that you've stopped for 15 minutes and you're on your way to your cottage or off to visit a friend, and you head into one of these sort of grocery or food outlets, and you can sort of just do a quick shop. So I think it's interesting because they are a convenience retailer as well as a fuel supplier. And so, yes, the other thing I would say is the other piece we were kind of toying with was this idea of octane. So you have your different octane levels now. Do you have, a 90, 150, and a 350 octane now, where, depending on the price you want to pay and the experience you want to have, if you're with your kids, you might want a 150 instead of a 350 charge because you want to run your kids down in a playground. Or if you're a senior, you may want a good long break on that longer road trip.
Makes sense. Thank you. Next one is like Electrify America / Canada and Tesla chargers. Who are the industry leaders who will sponsor these ideas and build them out more broadly?
I mean, maybe I can take that and say, well, Parkland's, one of those companies. They currently fuel tens of thousands of cars and service drivers across the country currently, and that they are site hosts, and as Ilana said, convenience retailers. So they're in a perfect position. A lot of us charge at Canadian Tire, for example. It's an example of another site host. But these, an organisation like Parkland and Petro Canada as well, are the kind of organisations who are used to providing convenience and fueling options for drivers. So I think they're really the natural fit. But there's no reason why Loblaws shouldn't do this and put it up on a cottage route somewhere. So you're coming back on a Sunday night from the cottage, and then you can do your week's shopping on the way back while your car's charging. But yeah, obviously Tesla. I think the Tesla business model, I don't know how, they're not convenience retailers. So currently we see obviously the Tesla chargers in like a lot of strip mall, shopping mall type locations. And, certainly they're one of the more kind of thoughtful location areas, but they ride on the back of other people's sites mostly, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, and I think one thing that kind of bubbled up as we were executing the competition is, and that's the advantage of putting out into the public space, is that you realize where things are wrong by trying to get it right. And so, we've realized that accessibility is an issue. Are chargers consistently cited for accessibility? No, and that's one thing that Parkland can accommodate. So instead of a charger just being popped in a regular parking spot, you can mindfully accommodate that. Or the need for pull through, that came up during the competition. We can make sure that that thinking goes in to the development. The other thing really is I think about safety. So that idea of stopping at night, and these hubs are welcoming, they're well lit. And as Nino said, it's that model where there's a site host, there's an operator. ideally that improves things like safety, reliability, and site maintenance, I think is key.
Great, thank you. Jumping back to what we were talking about earlier around charging times, with so many interesting things to do while you're charging, how do you ensure that people move on as soon as their EV is charged? If not, is there a place for EVs to line up while waiting for an empty charger?
So I think there's going to become, these sort of user experience conventions, whether that's an app that sort of pages you and notifies you, or some of the dings where if you sit in the spot for more than 10 minutes after your charge, you get a surcharge. Those kinds of tactics, and again, the designs you see are obviously very concise, but you could imagine parking zones that are for either overflow or non-charging vehicles happening around that perimeter. But yes, I think this is going to be a very interesting thing as these operators move from the legacy fuel space into the EV charging space to really drill down and understand the changes in the customer experience.
Okay, great.
You're not running out of questions, are you?
No, they keep coming in. So please, please continue to upvote the questions you most want to see answered.
Yeah, we'll go a few more minutes then.
Let's see, this one's more a comment, but let me know what you think. In the top awardees, the solar panels seemed inefficiently oriented for capturing energy and would retain snow in the winter. I assume this is just artist concept.
Yeah, so I mean, if you actually look at the circle, that one's interesting because you could imagine the orientation of the whole. It's a tilted canopy, so you could imagine that could be tilted exactly to a southern exposure. So the second prize winner could be very interesting in that regard. I agree. All of these will have to be adapted to, for reality. They are meant to be sort of the kind of first stab at solving the problem. And you can already see the tremendous leap they've made from old to new, and now we have to sort of take the new and continue to refine it, but for sure, it looks very beautiful, it's very sleek and very flat. Does there need to be some tilt to it? Quite possibly.
Great. Next one is Tesla is rolling out superchargers in large numbers already. Might they be interested in some of these designs?
I think it's fair to say that they are. I think a public comment has been made on one of the social platforms that they are interested in exploring collaboration on this. But to revisit some of the earlier comments, they don't own their own sites, and but we'd love it if they would be. We'd love it if they would be. I know they're building some cool stuff in the US, and they're talking about a drive-through down there. But yeah, if you have a good social channel and you're tweeting with Elon Musk, then please do share the designs with any of the Tesla people that you know, and encourage them to think about it. We'd love it if people just took these designs up and built them out anywhere that they want. We just wanted to inspire the whole community.
Okay. I'm going to skip down a little bit because you touched on it earlier. How is personal security considered in some of these new designs?
Well, I think the first thing is that they're all kind of, what they've done is the place where you park is the place where you charge, is right adjacent to the place where you shop and rest. So it's actually by design, quite safe, because you're not having to park your car far away, charge, gas up in one location and then park somewhere else and then walk across a busy parking lot. And so with the canopies as well that we see, a lot of them have got really cool lighting built into the consideration. So I think safety has been built into the fact that you don't have to cross big parking lots with cars zooming around all over the place. that where your car is charging is very adjacent to the retail facilities, and that you're in a covered, protected, well-lit area. So I think this is just a great upgrade on the gas fueling experience. And you're not standing outside pumping gas and exposed for 5 minutes while you're doing it. But then, so everyone on this call knows about the benefits of charging compared to gassing up.
Yeah, and I think there's, a lot of the designs had this beautiful transparency to them. So there's a really good visibility. And of course, if we're thinking about safety and we're thinking about a pandemic that we're all unfortunately still in the middle of, or hopefully at the tail end of, these big and accessible outdoor spaces are very interesting. So, if you're in the middle of a wave of something, you can get out of your vehicle and relax in a courtyard or a plaza and potentially not even have to go inside. So, security and safety in a different way. But I thought that was very interesting to see.
Great, thank you. Next one is on many people's minds. Have you consulted with power utilities as to their ability to provide sufficient amounts of power in remote areas where EVs will need to charge?
We have shared this competition and these designs with some utilities, and some major utilities have expressed interest in working with Parkland to ensure that these concepts are cited within their jurisdiction so that they can be part of the power supply solution. It's obviously challenging to get huge amounts of power into a location, and I think it's fair to say that there is a thought, consideration and planning going into how the charging solution can accommodate fluctuating power. And I expect there'll be some announcements about that at some point in the future.
Yeah, and I will say that, and I'm sure there's a conscientiousness of that in this group, but as different municipalities even transfer their fleets to electric and have that need for their own fleets to travel, you may not see a hub like this, but there will be charging infrastructure in different municipalities that will be potentially shared between government and public use. So I think there's all kinds of opportunities as all of this kind of rolls forward to improve those sort of blackout zones where there's a dearth of power.
And I think, as always, battery storage is going to likely be a big part of it.
Indeed. Yeah, absolutely right.
Okay, on to maintenance. Andrew asks, EV networks in Nova Scotia and elsewhere are often very poorly maintained. Do these designs take into account ease of equipment maintenance?
That question is like, it's just my biggest issue right now. Is the quality of public charging is just really bad. And I think, outside of the Tesla ecosystem, I really empathize with this question. I can't say that the designs, we didn't go down to that level of spec in the design brief to, make maintenance part of the requirements for the designs, because that would have been too much detail for this stage of the competition. But ensuring reliability, uptime, and so on is something that we are highlighting as a must-have in anything that gets built out in this regard.
Hey folks, how about maybe one more question, Jason, if you would?
One more? Okay, I'm just going to do a quick scan and see. This is further down the list, but I think it's interesting. Did any of the submissions feature battery swapping?
Okay, so I will give there was some wild stuff that came in. Nino may not even know this. There was even a submission that came in with a system of recharging tires. So the tires recharge the vehicle. It was from an engineering student, I believe. So yeah, the battery swapping I think it's a super cool idea. But no, I mean, the architects, part of the idea here was to get architects and the architecture community thinking about EVs often for the first time. So the three architects that we spoke to I don't think any of them had ever been in an EV, the three winning architects. So, I mean, and that's not a surprise if you think about the Canadian population, as you all know, it's like 66% of Canadians have never been in an EV. So we were trying to sensitize the community that is going to be building our future, putting right in front of them in the sort of on their table of, you know, this is a need, think about this when you are planning, you know, our buildings, when you're planning our cities. Yeah, I don't think that battery swapping was yet on their radar, but personally, I think it's a very cool idea. Nino, I don't know if you want to answer that as well.
Yeah, I know that in China, I think NIO's doing battery swapping, but obviously there's not the manufacturers, the OEMs bringing the vehicles to market right now. Yeah, so it wasn't part of the spec, but yeah, it could be. Yeah, it would be a great idea for another competition if that becomes mainstream.
Wonderful.
Can I squeeze one more in?
Okay, but it's going to cost you.
I got a special request. I think you guys touched on it earlier, but pull-throughs for trailers and so on. You mentioned that some designs included them. Was it a mandatory part of your brief, or how was it addressed?
Yeah, so, you know, it's interesting. Looking back, there are probably some other things we would have baked into our brief, like hindsight is 2020. But, you know, originally we tried to create a very simple ask. And we really were trying to shift the thinking more than we were trying to solve every problem. So I think now that is going to be a piece that's in the hands of Parkland to evolve the concept and make sure those needs are accommodated. But yes, we maybe thinking about it now, I would have put that in the program brief, but we were trying to ultra simplify it and engage as many architects as we possibly could around this problem.
Okay, thank you very much for all of your answers and everyone for all of your questions.
Indeed, that was very enlightening. Thank you so much for this. This was, I mean, Elena, you know, you guys, you tapped into some pretty creative juices there with these folks, and really interesting ideas. I think that, you know, it's kind of a race now, depending on what you read out there about charging, in that electric cars are now starting to arrive faster than chargers are starting to arrive. And so that the pressure on the infrastructure is growing. I think these look like destination points almost. They're so beautiful. You can't imagine them, you know, being replicated quickly and everywhere, but I think that they serve a really great purpose, right? And will it's going to be an enjoyable experience, and even placing them in strategic locations is going to be so valuable to the EV community. We thank you for drawing all those great ideas out, and thank you for coming on.
Well, yeah, thank you for having us, and yeah, thanks, Tim. I think you've hit the nail on the head. You know, it's this idea of stopping to charge being the worst thing in the world you can imagine with an EV, to actually it's going to be pretty nice.
Yeah,
so you know, we hope we just planted that seed a little bit, but it's
I didn't see any Ferris wheels or merry-go-rounds or anything like that.
There was one.
Was there? Oh man, you left out the fun stuff. Oh gosh. Oh, that's cute.
There's more to come.
Okay. I know there's a water slide in there somewhere.
Oh, I would love that. I'm with you, Tim. But again, I also wanted to thank the Electric Vehicle Society for their contribution to this. Like we really benefited from the driver survey and evolving our own thinking and the thinking of our major sponsors. And also, of course, it was wonderful having Wilf on the jury.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I'm sure that the members are excited to help in this sort of a cause. I mean, it serves us all well, right? And thanks, Jason, once again, for coming in and doing the Q&A. As always, you did a great job. I know it's hard when they're jumping around and people are upvoting, but in the end of the day, it was a good job, and I think we covered a lot of material.
No problem at all.
Yeah. So to everyone else, please watch for your invitation to the next episode of Canada Talks Electric Cars. Back in May of 2020, we kicked off this webinar series with guest Peter Hatches, and he's a senior person with KPMG. They KPMG does a report on electric cars every year and updates the file. And so at that time, Peter sort of offered kind of a guarded, reserved view of the future of EVs and the pace at which they'd come into adoption. But here we are now, 2 years later. They've updated their file, and Peter has agreed to come back and join us to give us an update on their view of things. And so I know you'll want to mark your calendar for Tuesday, April 3rd, always at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. Hope to see you there. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us on today's episode, and from all of us at Electric Vehicle Society. And until next month, stay well. This concludes tonight's episode.